Establishing that government arises from consent and possesses only delegated powers, Locke now explains how government should be structured to respect these limitations. His answer is the separation of powers, though his version differs significantly from the later, more refined separation developed by Montesquieu and the American founders. Locke identifies three distinct governmental powers: legislative, executive, and federative. The legislative power is supreme. It makes laws that bind everyone, including the executive. But supreme doesn't mean absolute. The legislature is constrained by natural law, by the purposes for which government was created, and by the rights it must protect. A legislature that systematically violates natural rights or acts beyond its mandate loses legitimacy. Why is legislative power supreme within government? Because lawmaking is the fundamental governmental function, establishing rules that remedy the state of nature's lack of settled, known law. The legislature represents the people who created government, so legislative supremacy reflects popular sovereignty. But the legislature cannot transfer its power to others, cannot rule by arbitrary decrees rather than established laws, and cannot take property without consent through representatives, all limitations that constrain legislative supremacy. The executive power enforces laws that the legislature makes. Locke insists these powers should be separated. Different hands should make and enforce laws. Why? Because it would be too tempting for those who make laws to exempt themselves from obeying them or to bend enforcement to their advantage. Separation of powers provides a check. The executive must enforce laws it didn't make. The federative power handles foreign affairs, war and peace, treaties and alliances. Locke recognizes this requires different decision-making than domestic policy. Foreign affairs demand secrecy and dispatch that legislative deliberation can't provide. In practice, federative and executive powers typically reside in the same hands, but they're conceptually distinct.
Locke does not separate judicial power as a distinct branch. This will be Montesquieu's contribution. For Locke, judging is part of executive power. Executing the law necessarily involves judging how it applies to particular cases. The later development of independent judiciary as a check on both legislative and executive power goes beyond Locke, though it's consistent with his logic of limiting power through institutional design. The most important limitation Locke places on government is that the legislature cannot be absolute. It cannot govern by arbitrary decrees. It must establish settled, known laws. It cannot rule for purposes other than the public good. And most crucially, it cannot take property without consent, meaning taxation requires representative consent. No taxation without representation has deep roots in Lockean political theory. But doesn't this create problems? If the legislature is supreme, who checks the legislature? Locke's answer is the people themselves. If the legislature betrays its trust, the people can remove it. This seems circular. The authority meant to remedy the state of nature's lack of impartial judge is itself judged by the people. But for Locke, this isn't a bug, it's a feature. Ultimate authority must reside somewhere, and better with the people than with an unaccountable government. Locke also recognizes what he calls prerogative, the executive's power to act for the public good, outside or even against the law when circumstances require it. This seems dangerous, granting discretionary power that could be abused. Locke acknowledges the risk, but argues that no law can anticipate every circumstance. And rigid adherence to law might harm the public good. As long as prerogative is exercised for the public good, it's legitimate. But who judges whether prerogative is properly used? Again, Locke says the people. If the executive abuses prerogative, the people can resist. This keeps returning ultimate judgment to the people themselves, which creates the potential for conflict, but also ensures government remains accountable. The separation of powers, legislative supremacy within limits, and popular sovereignty combine to create a structure of limited government. No single institution has absolute power. The legislature is supreme but constrained. The executive is powerful but subordinate to law. And overall stands the people, who created government and can unmake it if it betrays its purpose. This structure directly challenges Hobbes' unified absolute sovereignty. For Hobbes, dividing sovereignty creates instability and risks civil war. For Locke, concentrating power creates tyranny. The separation of powers trades some efficiency and decisiveness for greater security against oppression.